primary goal is to protect the financial interests of the church rather than the spiritual interests of the church.
Or even protecting the children.
Or protecting the community. They have uncovered troves and troves of secret documents, decades of abuse.
It's kind of like one revelation turns into 4 other revelations. Like, whoa, this is deeper than we realized.
We knew that there was abuse happening. This is no different than what we have seen, not just nationally, but globally. Just how much of this was documented and how much was withheld.
The ramifications of this extend so far.
So far.
This is not just a priest or the archbishop. This is the institution. Hey guys, real quick, before we get into it, do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. That way you don't miss out on any of the tea. Thanks. Good afternoon, Tasha. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Charles?
I'm doing great. So we have a little more serious episode that we're going to address today. Veers very differently from our other topics. Would you care to describe to everybody what we're about to get into?
Yeah, definitely very important. I do want to issue a bit of a trigger warning for those listening and watching. We are going to be discussing the Archdiocese of New Orleans and the current ongoing allegations and investigation into child abuse that's occurred within that organization. We are going to get into some of the details that have come out as it relates to reporting from The Guardian, the warrant that's been issued by the Louisiana State Police. So it's really important that as you're watching and listening, do so with care, be mindful of taking care of yourself and those around you, because I know this can be a really sensitive and distressing topic. And with that said, I think we're going to go ahead and get into it.
I say we just jump right into
we're going to jump right into this.
There's no other way to talk about this issue than just being direct. Right?
Being direct and getting straight at it. So we know that the Archdiocese of New Orleans is currently embroiled in a 4 years long bankruptcy proceeding. And what precipitated that bankruptcy was several lawsuits that have been filed against them as it relates to decades of abuse that has occurred throughout many organizations within the Archdiocese, whether it's within the parishes, through summer programs that were being held at some of the schools within the Archdiocese, long-standing years of abuse of children that has been allegedly covered up by the leadership within that organization. I think some things that are really important to note, again, as I mentioned, this has been a 4-year-long case that currently doesn't have an end in sight from what we can see, which has meant that these victims have not received any settlements yet.
How is that 4 years comparing to what other archdioceses have been going
I think that's
through?
a great question.
What's the context? How does it compare?
The national average for this type of case is 2.6 years.
Wow, so we're almost
and
double
we're at
that.
4. We're
double
almost
that already.
double that, right?
That's wild.
From a monetary standpoint, this has been very expensive. So on lawyers, different types of experts, the church has already spent $36.3 million.
Wow.
National average on that is somewhere between 13 and 15 million. So we're more than double.
We're
more than double on the dollars.
So
right?
why are we so unique in this now?
So I think that this is definitely one of those situations where it appears that the church has been withholding quite a bit with regards to how they handled these accusations of abuse. We are seeing more and more of what was previously very secret information coming out in these bankruptcy proceedings, which I think has extended these proceedings. It has, resulted in additional victims coming forward.
It's kind of like one revelation turns into 4 other revelations.
Right?
Whoa,
really
this is deeper than we realized.
Yeah, it really and truly is one of those things. We knew that there was abuse happening. And right, I mean, like this archdiocese is no different than what we have seen, not just nationally but globally, happening with this reckoning with the church. What I think has been particularly alarming as a former Catholic of the Archdiocese of New Orleans is just how much of this was documented and
That's the
how
important part,
much
yeah.
was withheld, allegedly, intentionally. And so, one of the claims that the attorneys for the victims, they're petitioning the bankruptcy judge to limit the fees that the church's attorneys are charging. I think you're really seeing a push for some resolution to happen. It's warranted, it's needed, it's deserved. These are people who have experienced deep, deep trauma, and I can not even begin to imagine how re-traumatizing this
Oh,
whole
yeah.
experience is, to have to go through this drawn out legal battle, particularly a legal battle where it seems like every other week we are getting a new deeply
Yeah.
disturbing revelation in what has occurred over decades within
Decades.
this organization. Just recently, though, we have seen a new
Even in
development
the past 2 weeks, there's been major new
that
developments.
has been heartening for me.
Oh, yeah.
Because one of the things that I've found most upsetting and frustrating is a lot of what we've talked about with regards to these cases in the Catholic Church, but specifically around the Archdiocese of New Orleans. They've been civil cases. It's been about money, and not that I don't think these victims deserve to receive settlements. I absolutely believe that. But those settlements don't result in accountability and punishment for those who were complicit and even aided in decades of abuse. But we've just seen that the Louisiana State Police have
They're now officially involved.
gotten involved. An 11-page warrant, a wide-ranging warrant that has been issued by the Louisiana State Police to the Archdiocese of New Orleans, and they're requesting any and all documentation as it relates to how these
Wow.
allegations
Wild.
of abuse were handled, how reporting or lack thereof to law enforcement was handled. And I think this is a much deserved, much needed reckoning.
And to clarify for people, this is a big deal to have the
This is
state involved,
huge.
right?
This
So
is huge.
this is not just a priest or the archbishop. This is the institution
The
of
entire
the Catholic
archdiocese.
Church and the Archdiocese of New Orleans. And for the state to get involved, that suggests much more serious levels of this that are now added. Right?
Absolutely. And we know that it's there, right? Because one of the things that has triggered this is The Guardian has done
Yeah.
significant reporting
Oh, yeah.
on this particular issue. In their reporting, they have uncovered troves and troves of secret documents detailing when certain leadership was potentially notified of alleged abuses by priests, certain behaviors that were occurring.
Patterns of behavior.
Patterns of behavior that were occurring.
Documented patterns of behavior.
Systems of, being secretive and withholding that were intentionally put in place. And they've publicized all of this, which is so important and so necessary. And I think without that, we probably would not have the Louisiana State Police involved in the way that they are. So as frustrating as some of these prolonged civil cases are, we wouldn't have some of this information were it not for these bankruptcy proceedings. So, as we kind of work through what some of these downstream impacts are, right? So the Archdiocese of New Orleans is filing for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
What does that mean for entities in our city that are safety nets, Catholic charities,
Yep.
shelters now, that can be impacted?
They're selling off a lot of their properties,
Right.
a lot of which are serving a very vulnerable population. So how the ramifications of this extend so far beyond just the actual accusations, which are terrible in themselves.
Yeah.
And again, it's just like we have one revelation, it comes into 4 other revelations. So what were some of the more most alarming things that you just recently learned that was not necessarily unearthed prior to, like, even last week?
Yeah, so
Because there's some big ones in there, huh?
Yeah, I know there are a few that you want to touch on. For me, I would definitely say what has been most disturbing, I think, is how systematic
Mm-hmm.
this
yeah.
was, right?
This was institutionalized.
Deeply institutionalized, and deeply accepted,
Oh, yeah.
right? Like this was just modus
That's a
operandi.
good point, actually, is like just like nonchalantly.
Yeah.
Like, okay, cool.
Yeah, the same way that if we started a club today and we, came up with our policies and guidelines for how we operate our club, that abuse of children and of vulnerable people in our communities was a part of the structure here.
Under the guise of religion.
Right. What are some of the things that you looked at and thought, I can't believe what I'm reading?
So the one thing that I truly could not believe, and I'm still, my brain's just not processing this. So, and we've talked about this, a very alarming detail that came to light was it became a known, and I want to again emphasize, it wasn't just a one-off thing. This was a pattern, a trend, right? They revealed that the, again, accused priests who were being allegedly accused of what they did, they would give certain gifts to children, but it wasn't just any gift.
Right.
It was a symbolic gift that demarcated that this child was a victim of abuse and had been groomed, and that essentially they were up for grabs.
Yeah.
I know that sounds weird to say, but that's actually what it was.
What it was, yeah.
It was like, oh, okay, see, I can't think of an example of a gift, but they gave this to the child, and the child go to another parish, for an event or something, and that gift, again, because it was institutionalized, right? It was a signifier to the other priests. Oh, and when you think about that, that's wild.
Yeah,
that's so disturbing. I don't even know.
I think when, again, as someone who was raised Catholic.
Yep. Our whole life, huh?
When you think about what we are taught about Jesus and how he lived, he was a protector of the least among us,
Correct.
Right? He physically put himself in the way of danger to protect those who were the less among us, the most vulnerable. And to think that the people that we as Catholics
trusted
were conditioned to trust.
Yes, good way to put it.
Grooming children and victimizing children in this way, but also conditioning parents to put their kids in these positions, right? This isn't just, I grew up Catholic and I went to Catholic church, right? I went to Catholic church. I went to Catholic school. I went to Catholic summer camp. Everything we did in our lives revolved around being in these communities, in these institutions where we are taught to trust those around us, right?
Yep.
They are the embodiment of Jesus Christ here on earth for us, right? They are to shepherd us to everlasting life because they uphold these moral standards. We look to them to guide us morally. Mm-hmm. We look to them to guide us to an everlasting life, to ensure, our souls. And in reality, this place is full of rot.
Yep. And everything you just said, to be clear, is the doctrine. That's what we're taught.
Yeah, this is what we're taught.
That's part of the education. That's part of the curriculum. And we, as we've entered adulthood, realized that that was all an illusion.
A complete illusion.
A sham. We were lied to. And that has really, you and I, you said recovering. No, what word did you use?
Recovering, reformed,
right?
A little bit of both.
Exactly. And I put myself in that same boat, and that speaks volumes because the only type of school I went to was Catholic school, right?
Yeah.
So to learn this stuff and to be taught this for years, and then to see what actually happened, that's rough, man. That's not a good. I don't know. That's rough. And these allegations that have only come forth even in the past week have just made me angrier.
Absolutely.
I know it made you angrier.
Oh my gosh.
Right? which is why we're doing this very serious topic, which is different than our other previous episodes, but it's absolutely worthy of talking about.
Yeah, I think it's so necessary to have this conversation, but again, on both sides of it, right? There
Absolutely.
needs to be accountability for the abuse that's occurred. We also need to recognize, what does this mean going forward? What does this
So what do you
look
think?
like
What do you
going
think it means going
forward?
forward, especially now that the state is involved? It's like this marks a new turn.
Yeah, this
It
is
really
a
does, a new
huge turning
stage, if
point.
you will. So what does this now mean? Like what do you think is about to happen now?
I hope that we are going to see criminal indictments
Okay.
come out of this. I don't think it's necessarily going to be fast, right? Like I think this is going to be a long investigation, but this warrant would have not have been issued
True.
if there wasn't something there to find, right? And again,
You said it's 11 pages, right?
11 pages, this initial one. Again, we know from the very, very extensive reporting that The Guardian has done, there is something there to find, right? Because they've seen it, they've viewed some of these documents. So I really hope that this means that there will be criminal accountability for those who have been complicit in this, who to this day remain in positions of power and influence within the Archdiocese, that they are no longer able to continue to hold themselves to a moral high ground that they are undeserving of.
So you said you hope this will happen. Do you think it'll happen?
I really don't know.
Yeah,
I really
I
don't
agree.
know.
I don't know.
You know, you got a lot of people
agree.
within this mix who are older. I think oftentimes there is a hesitance to put people on trial and convict them and put them in jail when they're, 70 plus years old. And what does it matter? That sort of thing. I think that despite the reduction in practicing Catholics in our community, I believe that this is still a city and a community that is very culturally Catholic.
Oh, that's a good way to put it. I agree.
And it's very difficult
Definitely.
to see those institutions you've believed in and supported and been such a huge part of your life, your upbringing, your community, be dismantled in this way. I do think, kind of like we touched on, Catholic charities, shelters, there are so many other components of the Archdiocese that are really important tenets of our community. There are so many vulnerable populations that are served by the Catholic Church. If we are in a situation where we have a huge dismantling of the leadership of this organization, what does that mean for these other entities within the community that are critical? They're important. They serve a necessary purpose, and despite their association or affiliation with the Archdiocese and by proxy, these horrible things that have happened, what do we do with, orphanages, shelters, adoption agencies, all of these other things that, healthcare centers, that people who are indigent and can go and receive healthcare. So I want there to be accountability. I want there to be criminal accountability. I also recognize that that's a lot easier said than
100%.
done. And I hope that we are able to find a way as we create that accountability and, essentially like clean house, so to speak, with the Archdiocese
But that's where it's tricky, right? So cleaning house, and I agree with you. It's not just the current people. Again, this dates back to the 60s,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, so there's a lot of people who are just dead and gone, right?
And that's,
like,
you know,
it
like
is what it is.
logistically,
And like,
yeah.
there's nothing you can do about that. But how, and like, maybe this is not a place you can clean house, right? Like maybe like it's all rotten and
So
it's
what
all
does that
gotta
mean
go.
then?
But like, what does that mean,
Yeah.
right? Like, what does that mean for the thriving parishes that people go to for community, for prayer, for spiritual support? What does that mean for them that they didn't commit these egregious crimes but
And
they, by association, are a part of an organization that is rotten to the core.
And not just I like that, rotten to the core, but not just the association, but also, the Archdiocese of New Orleans has been very vocal about parishioners and
They
their
want you to pay
money.
up.
Yes, like they have your money pay for the things that y'all did.
They've done this, right?
So now y'all need to help us pay for it. Wait, what?
Spent decades.
You already got my tuition money?
Retiring priests who they knew were abusers, paying pensions and rent and benefits on them, and now they're crying poor and looking to the parishioners going, we need you guys to help keep us afloat.
Yo, that's
wild.
That's absurd.
Right? We set up a system to cover up the fact that you were sending your children to places where we were allowing them to be abused, and now we want you to pay for it.
It's like when you say that out loud, like, wait a second, am I missing something?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Does this make sense to you? Because it doesn't make sense to me.
Do you think that detracts people? Do you think that's contributing to an erosion of, like, people leaving?
I 1000% think that a big...
At least maybe an generational difference?
There's a lot of reasons why people are leaving the Catholic Church, right? Like,
cultural issues,
women can't
LGBT,
be priests, LGBT. Like,
abortion.
There's a lot of, I think, social and cultural issues that have made people move away from the Catholic Church. But for sure, the issues around abuse and how the church broadly have handled it, I think are a big reason why people have left the Catholic Church. I mean, we have seen just in recent years how many parishes have closed, how many Catholic schools have closed, because people aren't sending their kids to Catholic schools, people aren't attending Catholic churches. As we get the migration away from
a more secular society,
the city, and people are moving out to suburbs where like churches haven't been built, or the new churches that are being built are not Catholic churches. I think you're just getting this general migration away.
100%.
The handling of these sorts of things don't help. As someone who, again, grew up in the church, it's like, even if I were to consider going back to Catholicism, when you read some of what is in these documents that have come out, how do you go to a place and join hands with and pray with people who've done this? How do you confess your sins to someone who has behaved in this manner? So I don't know how you even begin to keep the people you have, let alone bring new people in, if you are not willing to stand up and acknowledge what has been done. I mean, even as of last week, the statement that the Archdiocese released in response to the state police warrant, we do everything we can to, can participate with law enforcement to the best of our ability, or, some wishy-washy mess like that. And it's just like, no, you don't. Because if you were, they wouldn't be finding hundreds of pages of documents where you've done everything in your power to do everything but report to the police.
You just made me think of this, and, that acknowledging is very important.
Right.
I recently watched an interview, I think it was like 2 weeks ago on the news, a guy who was abused as a child. He's been part of this for years now. He's fighting the hard fight. He confronted the archbishop outside of a church. And he's, you can't really tell what the two of them are what they're saying to each other. But then the news interviews the guy after, and he's like, what do you want? He goes, I really just want him to admit that this has happened. Like, that's all I want.
Yeah.
I want a recognition and acknowledgement. Like, I want to hear you say it. Yeah. And they can't even get that.
And I think that
is so deeply frustrating.
That is the number one frustration, right? That
we know say it.
What have you done to ensure that this is no longer happening within your organization, right?
And won't
because
happen.
We do talk about a lot of, like, this happened in the 60s, this happened in the 70s. But we know that, like, it didn't magically evaporate.
Right. Wasn't like by the 80s it went away.
This is still happening today. So what are you doing now to ensure the safety of children and vulnerable people in our community? And why can't you just stand up and say,
why?
These things happened. And we didn't do enough. We didn't do the right things. We covered up that these things happened. And they won't.
Why do you think they won't?
Money, right? Because at the end of the day, we can talk about the teachings of Christ. We can talk about religion all day. This is still an entity with a lot of money to
Of
lose,
influence,
a lot of
global.
influence, and saying we did XYZ thing opens up to legal liability, right? And nobody wants to write that
No, you're
fact
not
check.
wrong
So
about that.
the reality is we are never going to get that sort of acknowledgement as long as the primary goal is to protect the financial interests of the church rather than the spiritual interests of the church.
Or even protecting the children.
Or protecting the community, right? Like, we're never going to get that kind of acknowledgement. And it's frustrating because when we talk about things that could bring people back, right? Redemption.
That's an important
redemption is...
Which is a part of their doctrine, right?
Redemption is such a huge tenet of
So
our
practice
doctrine.
what you preach, literally. Like,
Will we ever see a redemption for the church? And I'm not convinced.
I mean,
I'm not
history
convinced.
hasn't shown otherwise, so unless there's evidence.
I know we normally do like a little Pelican point to wrap up an episode. I think that this is a really serious episode.
Definitely.
And it really warrants a level of care. So what I would say is I think it's really important for all of us to really keep an eye on this Louisiana State Police investigation.
Mm-hmm.
It's significant. It is, in my opinion, a watershed moment in
Wow.
these types of cases.
I agree with you.
I think it's important here in the state of Louisiana. I also think it's important nationally and globally as we have these kinds of conversations around these issues within the Catholic Church. Appropriate accountability, not just civil accountability, but criminal accountability around these things. I think this is really something that's important to continue to keep our eye on. I also think it's so important to continue to watch these bankruptcy proceedings, what it will mean in the long term for the church, and how much longer this is going to drag out.
That's
We're
like
at year 4.
Jeez, we're already double the length of other places, so how much longer can this continue?
Where is it going? So we've talked a lot about the bankruptcy aspect, the Louisiana State Police, the facts of the case. But Charles, this goes a lot further for you and I.
It runs a lot deeper for you and I. There's a
It
personal
does.
element to this.
And so we probably need another episode for that. But what are we going to talk about in our next episode?
Well, we've been upfront with our listeners that we are products ourselves of the Catholic school system. And it just so happens that one of the priests who is arguably at the center, like the center of all of this, right? Where revelations of his abuse has led to revelations of other abuse, was the priest at our elementary school.
Yes.
And you and I vividly remember him.
Yep.
He's in our yearbook. There's pictures. You did reconciliation with him. I had my first communion with him. And he's at the center of all of this right now. And
admitted pedophile as well.
Right? And they kind of just transitioned to different parishes. So this touches home.
This is home.
This is home in a big way for you and I because we are recovering reformer, whatever you want to call it. And again, it just so happens that he's the one that was at our church.
Next time on Pelican Briefs.
Finding out that Lawrence Hecker was a priest, that the Archdiocese had what they considered confirmed allegations or credible allegations of abuse was not a surprise. Obviously, what was the level of detail. Most of this account comes from his own words. He was sent away to a program that priests who had allegations against them would go to. The gossip and the rumors throughout the church was, oh, well, he was spending parish money. Maybe he has a gambling problem. Father Larry's going away. Never really getting
a bonus episode only available on Patreon.
This person is a pedophile and that he should not be allowed to be around minors. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Pelican Briefs.
If you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.
If you are loving the show, you can help us keep the conversation going by supporting us on Patreon.
Your contribution on Patreon ensures we can continue producing quality content you love.
Click the link in the description to become a patron today.
Until next time, this is Pelican Briefs.